From New York, this is Democracy Now! Gaza's lost classrooms, hunger, bombardment, and the prospect of a third consecutive year without education. The school year began in Israel this week with the sound of bells and the shuffle of notebooks. Millions of Israeli students returned to classrooms, teachers welcomed them, and parents snapped first-day photos. But just across the border in Gaza, a parallel story unfolded with no joy and no routine. Children starved, families fled bombardments, and schools, once sanctuaries of learning, stood as ruins, shelters, or morgues. For Gaza's children, this is the third consecutive year without education. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, now warns of a lost generation. More than 660,000 Palestinian children are cut off from schooling, some for the entire span of their formative years. Many may never return, a mourning of death. At dawn on Monday, Israeli airstrikes struck Gaza again. Health officials reported at least 54 Palestinians killed, including people waiting in line for food. Later that day, Gaza's health ministry confirmed 13 more deaths from starvation, 3 of them children. That brings the total number of hunger-related deaths to more than 360. The deaths are not isolated tragedies. They are symptoms of a system buckling under the pressure of siege. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, a leading global monitor, says more than 500,000 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are suffering catastrophic levels of hunger. That figure means households are out of food and face starvation, malnutrition, and death unless aid arrives. The blockade tightened by Israel's military campaign has left Gaza's markets barren, humanitarian convoys stalled, and ordinary families like that of Khaled al-Masri trapped in desperation. "I want to find a place where I can stay with my sons and daughters," al-Masri said in a trembling voice. "I don't know where to go. Moving out requires money. I can't even find something to eat. It has been 2 months without food. I don't know where to go. I borrowed money from here and there. No one is standing by me to give me anything. No one is standing with the Palestinian people. Gaza City under siege." As Israeli forces push deeper into Gaza City, once home to about 1 million people, a steady stream of Palestinians fled northward, hauling bags, children, and fragments of their lives. Entire families walked along blasted roads, not knowing where safety might lie. For many, the only destination left is a temporary shelter in a bombed-out school or a makeshift tent city. The irony is brutal. Schools meant for learning now double as shelters, and even those are not safe. Several UNRWA schools have been hit during Israeli strikes, killing civilians who thought they had found refuge. Desks and chalkboards are covered in dust and blood. Children sleep in classrooms where equations remain scrawled across blackboards, reminders of a world that feels impossibly distant. A third year without lessons. Before the war, Gaza's education system was fragile but functioning. Schools operated on double shifts due to overcrowding, teachers coped with shortages of supplies, and children navigated daily blackouts that cut into study time. But learning continued. Classrooms buzzed with ambition. Students recited poems, memorized history, dreamed of careers in medicine or engineering. The war has obliterated that fragile infrastructure. For the third consecutive year, classrooms remain closed. Some have been flattened by bombs. Others are commandeered as shelters. Teachers have been killed. Students are displaced. Even where a building still stands, the absence of security, electricity, and supplies makes lessons impossible. UNRWA's warning of a lost generation is not rhetorical. Education is cumulative. Missing 1 year creates gaps. Missing 2 risks derailing entire cohorts. Missing 3 makes recovery almost impossible. Children who were in first grade before the war are now in their 4th year of schooling, yet many cannot read or write. Adolescents who are preparing for exams have lost the momentum that determines whether they enter university or the workforce. Hunger as an obstacle to learning. Even if schools reopen tomorrow, hunger would make learning impossible. Teachers report students fainting in class from lack of food. Families describe children waking at night crying for bread. Malnutrition impairs concentration, stunts growth, and diminishes cognitive development. The World Health Organization warns that chronic hunger in early childhood can cause irreversible damage to brain development. In Gaza, this means that hundreds of thousands of children are not only missing school, but are also losing the biological capacity to learn effectively. The blockade is not only creating short-term hunger, it is sabotaging the long-term potential of a generation. The contrast across the border, the contrast with Israel, could not be sharper. As millions of Israeli students return to classrooms, debates center on curriculum changes, technology and education, and how to support students coping with anxiety from rocket alerts. For Gaza's children, the debate is not about curriculum, but survival. The difference underscores the asymmetric reality of the conflict. One society plans its future, the other is denied even the tools to imagine one. Parents in despair. For parents like Khaled al-Masri, the despair is acute. Education once represented hope, a chance for children to escape the cycle of poverty, blockade, and conflict. Now, even the hope feels cruel. What future awaits a child who has not seen a classroom in 3 years, who has witnessed friends buried under rubble, who goes to sleep hungry? Al-Masri's words capture the desperation. I can't even find something to eat. It has been 2 months without food. I borrowed money from here and there. In that calculus, school is a luxury. Survival is the only subject left. Teachers as survivors. Teachers, too, are victims. Hundreds of educators have been killed in airstrikes. Others are displaced, living in shelters, struggling to care for their own families. Those who remain speak of grief that makes teaching impossible. How do you teach when your students are buried? One teacher asked a journalist. How do you teach math when you are counting your dead? The trauma is collective. Children who return to school, whenever that may be, will bring grief, hunger, and fear into classrooms. Teachers will face students who have seen parents killed, siblings starve, homes destroyed. Education will not resume as though nothing happened. It will require rebuilding not only structures, but psyches. International warnings. The United Nations has repeatedly warned of the long-term consequences of denying education to an entire generation. In conflict zones worldwide, children who miss years of schooling are more likely to remain in poverty, to marry early, and to be drawn into cycles of violence. In Gaza, where unemployment already hovered at catastrophic levels before the war, the absence of education will entrench despair. Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of UNRWA, has warned that the destruction of Gaza's education system is a collective punishment that violates international law. Human rights groups argue that deliberately targeting or neglecting education in war zones constitutes a war crime. Israel, for its part, insists it does not target schools, but says Hamas uses them for military purposes, making them legitimate targets. The result, regardless of intention, is that children lose classrooms. The numbers behind the crisis: at least 54 Palestinians killed in Monday's airstrikes. 13 starvation deaths the same day, including 3 children. More than 360 hunger-related deaths since the blockade tightened. More than 500,000 people in catastrophic hunger conditions. About 1 million residents in Gaza City facing Israeli assault. More than 660,000 children without school for 3 years. Each number tells a story of interrupted life. A child who should be mastering multiplication tables is instead mastering the art of running for cover. A teenager who should be preparing for exams is preparing to dig through rubble for food. The politics of education. Education has always been political in Gaza. Israel controls borders, materials, and infrastructure, determining what textbooks can enter, what supplies are permitted. Hamas, too, has politicized curricula, emphasizing resistance. International donors have tried to carve out space for neutral, globally recognized education, but the war has made such efforts nearly impossible. For Israel, the destruction of schools is framed as a byproduct of targeting Hamas infrastructure. For Palestinians, it is evidence of deliberate dehumanization. For the international community, it is a crisis with no easy solution. Rebuilding schools requires peace, funding, and materials, none of which are currently available. A generation in limbo. The phrase lost generation is often used in history to describe cohorts scarred by war, the soldiers of World War I, the children of the Great Depression, the youth of Rwanda. In Gaza, the term is literal. Children who entered kindergarten in 2022 may reach adolescence without ever experiencing normal schooling. That loss is not just individual but societal. An entire population risks being locked into underdevelopment. A people deprived of education cannot build institutions, cannot compete in a global economy, cannot heal from trauma. The cost will echo for decades. Resistance through learning. Even amid destruction, some families insist on education as resistance. Parents tutor children in shelters using scraps of paper and charcoal. Teachers organize informal lessons in tents. Children swap books when they can find them, holding onto fragments of learning as symbols of dignity. These efforts matter. They show that even in famine, even under bombardment, the human spirit clings to knowledge, but they are no substitute for functioning schools. The future. What would it take to restore education in Gaza? At minimum, a ceasefire, unfettered humanitarian access, rebuilding of infrastructure, and international funding. But even then, the challenge would be immense. Thousands of teachers would need training and trauma support. Children would need counseling as much as classrooms. Curricula would need revision to bridge lost years. Without such investment, Gaza risks producing a generation with neither education nor opportunity, a generation for whom violence and poverty are the only realities they have known. That outcome would not only devastate Palestinians, but destabilize the region. Despair breeds extremism. Education breeds hope. Conclusion. A bell that does not ring. On Monday morning across Israel, school bells rang. Children laughed, scuffed shoes on playgrounds, traded summer stories. Across Gaza, silence reigned, broken only by drones overhead and parents weeping over shrouded bodies. This is the third year without classrooms for more than 660,000 children. The world watches, counts casualties, and debates policy. But every day without education closes another door in their lives. Hunger gnaws at their bodies. Trauma rewrites their memories. And the schools that once promised escape stand in rubble. The contrast is unbearable. One society prepares its children for the future. Another is denied the present. Until education resumes, Gaza's children are suspended in limbo, living in a world where the only lessons are survival and loss. The question is not whether they are a lost generation. The question is whether the world will allow them to remain lost. Naming genocide. When the world's leading scholars declare Gaza's destruction a crime against humanity, on a quiet academic listserv, usually reserved for conference invitations and calls for papers, an extraordinary message was circulated last week. The International Association of Genocide Scholars, IAGS, the world's foremost scholarly body devoted to the study and prevention of genocide, announced that its members had passed a resolution declaring that Israel's actions in Gaza meet the legal definition of genocide as established by the United Nations Genocide Convention. The vote, according to IAG's President Melanie O'Brien, was decisive. This resolution declaring what is happening in Gaza as genocide passed by an overwhelming majority, far beyond the two-thirds majority required, she said. For an organization known for its caution, its members spend years parsing definitions, sifting evidence, and weighing legal thresholds. The declaration is remarkable. It represents not only a scholarly judgment, but a moral alarm bell. To name genocide is to strip away ambiguity. It is to say that the devastation in Gaza is not only war, not only tragedy, but a deliberate attempt to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The weight of the word. Genocide is the crime of crimes. It is a legal category defined in the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, drafted in the shadow of the Holocaust. To apply it requires meeting a high bar, demonstrating both mass killing or serious harm and the specific intent to destroy a protected group. Because of this, genocide scholars are cautious. They debate whether the massacres in Rwanda, the starvation in Ukraine in the 1930s, the killings in Bosnia, or the repression of the Rohingya in Myanmar meet the definition. To declare a case genocide is not advocacy alone. It is scholarship that carries enormous implications. It invokes obligations under international law to prevent, to punish, to act. When IAGS names Gaza a genocide, the world must take notice. This is not a fringe organization, but the body that gathers the field's most respected researchers, legal experts, and historians. Its declarations carry weight in courts, in governments, and in public debates. The resolution states that Israel's policies and actions in Gaza meet the legal definition of genocide as found in the Genocide Convention, constituting war crimes and crimes against humanity. It lists patterns of conduct: massive bombardment of civilians, systematic destruction of infrastructure, deprivation of food and medicine through blockade, and the killing of thousands of children. It highlights not only the acts themselves, but the rhetoric of Israeli officials, some of whom have called for Gaza to be erased, flattened, or emptied. Such language, when combined with lethal acts, has historically been treated as evidence of genocidal intent. For O'Brien and her colleagues, the evidence is overwhelming, far beyond the two-thirds majority required, she emphasized, suggesting that scholarly hesitation has eroded under the weight of documentation. A parallel alarm from the United Nations. The IAGS resolution is not the only signal. Hundreds of staffers at the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights recently signed a letter urging their agency to declare Israel's assault on Gaza a genocide. They went further, calling on UN member states to suspend arms sales to Israel. This internal revolt reflects frustration within the UN bureaucracy, where formal statements are often watered down by political pressure. For career staffers to risk their positions by making such a demand indicates the depth of alarm. Together, the scholars' resolution and the staffers' letter suggest that within the institutions most attuned to mass atrocity, the consensus is shifting. What is happening in Gaza is not merely excessive force or collateral damage. It is genocide. The human evidence, the numbers tell a grim story. Since the war began nearly 2 years ago, Gaza's health ministry reports more than 50,000 Palestinians killed, over half of them women and children. Thousands more remain missing under rubble. Starvation deaths are mounting, with more than 360 confirmed, including infants. The Integrated Food Security Phase classification estimates that more than 500,000 Gazans are at catastrophic levels of hunger. Hospitals are overwhelmed, many operating without electricity or basic supplies. Schools have been flattened or turned into shelters that are then bombed. Families move repeatedly, ordered to evacuate only to be struck in supposed safe zones. The total displacement approaches the entire population of the Strip, about 2 million people uprooted again and again. Each of these indicators, mass killing, starvation, destruction of essential infrastructure, forced displacement maps onto the acts prohibited in the Genocide Convention. The intent question is answered, scholars argue, by official rhetoric and the systematic nature of the campaign. Historical echoes. Scholars of genocide cannot help but hear echoes. The starvation of civilians recalls the siege of Leningrad or the Armenian genocide. The language of erasure recalls Rwanda, where Tutsis were called cockroaches before being massacred. The displacement recalls Bosnia, where Serbs spoke of cleansing territory of Muslims. In each of those cases, the international community hesitated to use the word genocide until the evidence was overwhelming and the killing was advanced. In each case, later generations asked, why did no one act sooner? The IAG's resolution is a conscious attempt to prevent that repetition. Israel's response. Israeli officials categorically reject the accusation of genocide. They argue that their campaign is aimed at Hamas, the militant group that attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023, killing about 1,200 people and taking more than 200 hostages. They insist they do not target civilians deliberately and blame Hamas for embedding fighters in dense urban areas. Israel also points to its evacuation orders and humanitarian corridors as evidence of intent to protect civilians. Critics counter that such orders are impossible, as the International Committee of the Red Cross has warned, and that corridors often lead to areas that are themselves bombed. For Israel, the genocide accusation is more than rhetoric. It is a legal and diplomatic threat. If accepted by courts or governments, it could trigger sanctions, arms, embargoes, and international prosecutions. The global divide. The Genocide Declaration sharpens the global divide over Gaza. Many Western governments, including the United States and key European allies, continue to back Israel diplomatically and militarily, even as they express concern over civilian casualties. In contrast, much of the global South, including South Africa, Brazil, and large swaths of the Arab and Muslim world, frame Israel's actions as crimes against humanity. South Africa has already filed a case at the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of genocide. The Hague's resolution bolsters that case, providing scholarly authority to claims often dismissed as political. The weight of words. Declaring genocide is not only about law, it is about power. The word carries moral urgency unmatched by other terms. Crimes of war or excessive force may spark debate. Genocide demands action. The Genocide Convention obligates states to prevent and punish, not merely to condemn. That is why governments resist the word. During the Rwanda genocide in 1994, U.S. officials avoided it for months, fearing the legal obligations it would trigger. In Bosnia, it took years for courts to declare the Srebrenica massacre genocide. By acting now, the Hague challenges the culture of delay. It says, the evidence is clear, the intent is visible, and waiting will only produce more dead. The human face. Beyond law and politics are the children of Gaza. Families line up for bread only to be struck by bombs. Infants die in incubators when electricity is cut. Parents cradle shrouded bodies in hospital courtyards. Journalists describe children wandering bloodied and dazed through rubble. One Palestinian father, after a strike, killed 6 children on Al Nasser Street, told reporters, "These children are the beloved of God. What was their sin?" That cry captures the essence of genocide's horror, the destruction of innocence, not as collateral, but as consequence. The role of scholars. Why should scholars matter when governments hold the guns and the vetoes? Because scholarship preserves truth against denial. Genocide is always accompanied by denial. Perpetrators insist they are defending themselves, that the victims are guilty, that the killing is exaggerated. Scholars document, archive, analyze, and testify. Their work becomes the basis for trials, for reparations, for historical memory. When scholars act in unison, they amplify the signal. The IAGS Declaration tells courts, journalists, and citizens, this is not ambiguous. This is not propaganda. This is genocide. The next steps. What comes after such a declaration? Legally, cases at the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court may gain momentum. Politically, governments may face pressure to suspend arms sales, as UN staffers demanded. Civil society groups may mobilize around the genocide frame, shifting public opinion. But the immediate impact is moral. To name genocide is to say to survivors, the world sees you. It is to say to perpetrators, history will judge you. It is to say to bystanders, neutrality is complicity. The stakes for the future. The stakes extend beyond Gaza. If the world allows a declared genocide to proceed without intervention, the Genocide Convention itself is hollowed out. If Israel can flatten Gaza while receiving Western arms and aid, what message does that send to other governments tempted to destroy a population? The credibility of international law is on trial. Scholars have done their part by naming the crime. Now governments must decide whether they will uphold the law they signed in 1948 or watch it collapse under the weight of hypocrisy. Conclusion. From warning to action. Melanie O'Brien's words were sober but urgent. This resolution declaring what is happening in Gaza as genocide, passed by an overwhelming majority, far beyond the two-thirds majority required. Behind her careful phrasing is a seismic shift. The world's leading genocide scholars have spoken with unusual clarity. The images from Gaza, the dead children wrapped in blankets, the hospitals turned into morgues, the starving families wandering with empty pots, are not isolated tragedies. They are pieces of a pattern. The pattern has a name. It is genocide. The question now is not whether scholars can agree. They have. The question is whether governments, courts, and citizens will act before more of Gaza's children are lost, not only to bombs and hunger, but to the silence of a world unwilling to heed the alarm. Sailing against the siege, global activists launch flotilla for Gaza as protests, spread from Barcelona to Melbourne to Denver. In the port of Barcelona on Monday morning, dozens of ships lined up along the quay, their hulls heavy with food, medicine, and symbolic defiance. Civilian activists, students, doctors, trade unionists, clergy, and environmentalists boarded with banners, water bottles, and an air of nervous anticipation. The global COOEd flotilla, the largest such attempt to date, set sail for Gaza with a simple yet audacious mission: to break Israel's blockade of the besieged enclave and deliver humanitarian aid to more than 2 million Palestinians trapped inside. Among those helping to organize the effort was Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, who has lent her voice and profile to causes far beyond climate change. For her, the Gaza campaign is not separate from the environmental struggle, but part of a broader fight for justice and survival. Israel are very clear about their genocidal intent. They want to erase the Palestinian nation. They want to take over the Gaza Strip, Thunberg told reporters. And if that doesn't make people act, if that doesn't make people go out of their couch and take action, fill the streets, get organized, then I don't know what will. Her words captured both urgency and frustration. For nearly 2 years, Gaza has endured bombardment, siege, and starvation. International organizations warn of famine. Hospitals have collapsed. More than 50,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to Gaza health officials, the majority women and children. Yet governments, especially in the West, continue to supply Israel with weapons and diplomatic cover. For activists like Thunberg, the flotilla is a way to force the world to look again, to puncture indifference with action. Barcelona, a harbor of resistance. Barcelona has a history of solidarity with Palestine, its city council voting in recent years to sever ties with Israel over human rights abuses. On Monday, the port became a stage for a new chapter of that solidarity. Ships were decorated with Palestinian flags. Volunteers loaded boxes of flour, rice, canned goods, and medical supplies. Organizers emphasized that the aid itself, though vital, was symbolic compared to the need. The true aim was to challenge the legality and morality of Israel's blockade, which human rights groups have long described as collective punishment in violation of international law. Hundreds of well-wishers gathered on the docks, chanting slogans and waving signs as the ships departed. For some, the scene recalled earlier flotillas, especially the Freedom Flotilla of 2010, which ended in tragedy when Israeli commandos stormed the Mavi Marmara, killing 9 activists and sparking international outrage. That memory hangs over the COOEd flotilla. Participants know the risks. Israel has vowed not to allow any vessel to breach the blockade. Interception is likely. Violence is possible. Still, the ship sailed. The name, COOEd. The flotilla's name is telling. COOEd is an Arabic word meaning steadfastness, a concept central to Palestinian identity. It captures the determination to endure displacement, occupation, and siege without surrendering dignity. By calling themselves the Global COOEd Flotilla, activists align their mission not only with humanitarianism, but with Palestinian resistance. They are not saviors, but companions in struggle. Organizers said the flotilla would proceed in waves. The first set of ships departed Spain. A second wave will leave Tunisia in the coming days. Together, they hope to converge in the Mediterranean before attempting to reach Gaza's coastline. It is a symbolic armada, civilian vessels confronting a military blockade, Australia blocking the port of Melbourne. The Barcelona launch was not the only action. In Australia, peace activists held a nonviolent blockade on Monday at Port Melbourne, stopping trucks and delaying shipments. Their demand that Australia suspend trade with Israel until it ends the war and siege on Gaza. Protesters linked arms, sang songs, and carried placards accusing their government of complicity in war crimes. Police eventually moved in, but the action drew significant attention in a country where debate over arms sales and trade ties with Israel is intensifying. Australia, like many Western states, has condemned civilian casualties, but continues to maintain strong defense and economic relations with Israel. Activists argue that symbolic words mean nothing without material consequences. By blocking a port, they aim to connect the war abroad with economic flows at home. Denver, Jewish voices of dissent. In the United States, protests spread to Colorado. On Friday, dozens of Jewish peace activists and allies rallied outside the Denver office of Senator Michael Bennet, demanding that he and fellow Democratic Senator John Hickenlooper join 27 other Senate Democrats and independents who voted to block arms transfers to Israel. For many, the protest was deeply personal. Jewish activists carried signs declaring, "Not in our name." Rabbis read prayers for the dead in Gaza. Survivors of past wars spoke of the moral duty to oppose oppression. By choosing Bennett's office, protesters targeted a senator who has expressed sympathy for humanitarian concerns, but has not broken with the administration's policy of supplying arms. Their message was clear. To vote for weapons is to vote for the continuation of slaughter. To block arms is not to abandon Israel, but to refuse complicity in war crimes. The global pattern, from Barcelona to Melbourne to Denver, the actions reflect a global pattern. Civil society is moving faster and further than governments. While political leaders calibrate alliances, activists act. While governments delay, civilians organize flotillas, block ports, and occupy offices. The protests are decentralized but coordinated in spirit, united by outrage at images of starving children, bombed hospitals, and grieving families in Gaza. The flotilla embodies this spirit physically, setting sail across borders and seas. The protests in Melbourne and Denver echo it on land, disrupting the flows of trade and politics. Together, they form a chorus of dissent, challenging not only Israel, but also the governments that shield it. The siege of Gaza, the blockade of Gaza, began in 2007 after Hamas took control of the territory. Israel, with Egypt's cooperation, has tightly controlled the entry of goods, fuel, and people. Even before the war, Gaza was described as an open-air prison. Since the October 7th attacks of 2023, the blockade has tightened into near-total siege. Food, medicine, and fuel are scarce. Aid convoys are repeatedly blocked or bombed. The United Nations warns that famine is imminent. Israel defends the blockade as necessary to prevent weapons smuggling to Hamas. Critics counter that the blockade is deliberately strangling civilians, violating the prohibition on collective punishment under international law. For Palestinians, the siege is not an abstraction. It is the hunger gnawing at children's stomachs, the blackout of electricity, the inability to rebuild after airstrikes. Risks of the flotilla. The global Sumud flotilla knows the risks it faces. In 2010, the Freedom Flotilla ended in bloodshed when Israeli naval forces intercepted the ships in international waters. 9 activists were killed, another later died of injuries, and dozens were wounded. The incident sparked international condemnation, but Israel faced little lasting consequence. This time, activists are determined but cautious. They emphasize their civilian and humanitarian nature, carrying only aid supplies and medical equipment. Still, they expect confrontation. Organizers have established communication protocols, legal support, and media strategies to ensure that if violence occurs, the world will know. The ships carry not only food, but cameras, not only medicine, but witnesses. Greta Thunberg's involvement. Greta Thunberg's participation adds a unique dimension. Known globally for her climate activism, she brings youth credibility, media attention, and moral clarity. By framing Israel's actions as genocidal, she ties the struggle for Palestine to broader global justice movements. She also risks backlash. Already, critics accuse her of politicizing her platform or of anti-Semitism, charges she rejects. For Thunberg, the issue is intersectional. Climate justice, racial justice, and Palestinian justice are linked. In each case, she argues, powerful actors sacrifice vulnerable populations. In each case, silence is complicity. Her words, "If that doesn't make people act, then I don't know what will," capture a generation's frustration with politics as usual. Jewish voices and moral complexity. The protests in Denver highlight a critical element, Jewish dissent. Across the United States and Europe, Jewish groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now have organized rallies, sit-ins, and blockades against Israel's war in Gaza. Their message is that opposition to Israeli policies is not opposition to Jewish identity. On the contrary, they frame their activism as rooted in Jewish values of justice and memory of persecution. This internal dissent complicates the narrative often presented by governments which equate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. By standing in front of Senator Bennett's office, Jewish activists insist on a distinction. The State of Israel does not speak for all Jews, and supporting Palestinian rights does not negate Jewish safety. The role of governments, so far, governments have largely resisted pressure. The United States continues to supply Israel with weapons. European countries voice concern but maintain ties. Australia has not suspended trade. Spain and Ireland have been more outspoken but stopped short of sanction. The protest movements argue that governments are complicit, either through action or inaction. They demand concrete measures, arms, embargoes, sanctions, recognition of Palestine, suspension of trade agreements. The flotilla, by physically challenging the blockade, embodies the demand for direct action. The human stakes. For Palestinians in Gaza, these actions are not abstract. Every box of medicine on a ship, every protest that slows arms shipments, every senator pressured to vote against transfers could mean survival. Families in Gaza live with starvation, bombardment, and displacement. They have lost homes, schools, hospitals, and children. Their appeals to governments are drowned out by geopolitics. The flotilla and protests are attempts to amplify their voices. Khaled al-Masri, a father in Gaza, recently described his despair. "It has been 2 months without food. I borrowed money from here and there. No one is standing with the Palestinian people." His words underscore why activists risk arrest or interception, because silence is unbearable. International law. Legal experts argue that Israel's blockade, especially in its tightened wartime form, violates international humanitarian law. The Geneva Conventions prohibit starvation as a weapon of war. Collective punishment is banned. The International Court of Justice is already hearing a case brought by South Africa accusing Israel of genocide. The flotilla may not alter legal proceedings, but it dramatizes the issue. If aid cannot reach Gaza by land and is blocked by sea, then what recourse remains? Conclusion: sailing against indifference. The global Sumud flotilla, the Melbourne blockade, and the Denver rally are pieces of a larger mosaic. They show that across continents, ordinary people are refusing to accept Gaza's suffering as normal. Ships sail, ports close, offices fill with chants. Together, these actions insist on visibility, solidarity, and accountability. The risks are high, the outcome uncertain, but the symbolism is powerful. Against a military siege backed by powerful states, civilians sail with flour and bandages. Against political inertia, activists block trucks. Against silence, voices rise in prayer and protest. As the flotilla makes its way east across the Mediterranean, the world watches. Whether Israel intercepts the ships or allows them through, the message has already been sent. The blockade is not uncontested. Gaza is not forgotten. And solidarity can travel across seas and borders. In the words of Greta Thunberg, if that doesn't make people act, then I don't know what will. Mourning in Sana'a, the funeral of Houthi leaders killed in Israeli strike and the expanding shadow of war. On Monday, the heart of Yemen's capital pulsed with grief and defiance. At the largest mosque in Sana'a, thousands of mourners gathered to bid farewell to Ahmed Galeb al-Rahawi, the prime minister of the Houthi-run government, and 11 other senior officials killed in what the Houthis say was an Israeli strike. Coffins draped in flags and flowers line the courtyard as chants of mourning mixed with slogans of resistance. The scene was not only a funeral but a political statement. A mass ritual that signaled Yemen's war, already nearly a decade old, has entered a dangerous new phase, linked directly to Israel's ongoing war in Gaza and the wider regional confrontation. The images from Sana'a on Monday showed a river of men, women, and children filing into the mosque, holding portraits of the fallen leaders and banners condemning Israel and the United States. Clerics delivered fiery sermons. Armed guards in Houthi uniforms stood watch on rooftops. The funeral procession stretched far beyond the mosque's walls, spilling into surrounding streets. It was one of the largest public gatherings in Sana'a since the Houthis seized the capital in 2014. The strike, details of the strike remain murky, as often happens in Yemen's fog of war. Houthi officials say an Israeli missile targeted a high-level meeting in the northwestern province of Hajj, killing al-Rahawi and other senior figures. Israel has not publicly confirmed responsibility, but anonymous defense sources told regional outlets that the strike was retaliation for Houthi missile and drone attacks on Israeli shipping lanes in the Red Sea. For months, Houthi forces aligned with Iran have harassed shipping routes in the Bab al-Mandeb Strait and Red Sea, claiming solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. They have launched missiles toward Eilat, Israel's southern port, and threatened to widen their campaign if the war continues. The United States and Britain have conducted joint strikes on Houthi targets to protect commercial traffic. But this is the first time Israel itself has been directly tied to an attack inside Yemen. The deaths of al-Rahawi and 11 other leaders suggest a significant escalation. Until now, Israel's confrontation with the Houthis had been indirect through maritime defense and international coalitions. By striking deep inside Yemen, Israel has signaled that it considers the Houthis not just a nuisance, but an enemy worthy of targeted assassination. The leaders, Ahmed Galeb al-Rahawi, was not widely known outside Yemen, but was central to Houthi governance. As prime minister of the internationally unrecognized government in Sana'a, he oversaw ministries, budgets, and negotiations with aid agencies. His death leaves a vacuum in the Houthi administration. The other 11 killed reportedly included senior military commanders and political figures. Their loss will disrupt Houthi coordination, at least temporarily, though analysts caution that the movement has long cultivated a deep bench of loyal cadres ready to step in. Still, funerals of such scale emphasize the significance. These were not mid-level commanders, but the highest ranks of Houthi leadership. The funeral as politics. Funerals in the Middle East often double as political theater, and Monday's ceremony was no exception. Speeches framed the dead as martyrs not only for Yemen, but for Palestine. Banners read, "Death to America, death to Israel, victory to Islam," echoing the Houthis' long-standing slogan. The sheer size of the turnout was itself a message. Despite years of bombing by the Saudi-led coalition, despite famine and cholera and economic collapse, the Houthis retained strong mobilizing power in the capital. Crowds chanted both mourning and defiance. With our blood and souls, we sacrifice for the martyrs, they cried. Clerics urged continued resistance against Israel and its allies. Houthi media broadcast the event live, ensuring that images of packed streets and flag-draped coffins reached audiences across the region. A war expanding. For years, Yemen's conflict was seen as a separate tragedy, devastating but contained. Since 2015, a Saudi-led coalition backed by the United States has bombed Houthi areas to restore the internationally recognized government. Tens of thousands have been killed, millions displaced, and the country plunged into what the UN has called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. But the Gaza war has changed the equation. The Houthis, framing themselves as part of Iran's axis of resistance, alongside Hezbollah and militias in Iraq, have positioned their attacks on Red Sea shipping as direct solidarity with Palestinians. By targeting ships linked to Israel or bound for its ports, they have drawn the conflict outward. Israel's reported strike on Yemen is therefore not just retaliation. It is a widening of the Gaza war into another front. The risk is clear. As Gaza burns, Lebanon simmers, Iraq sees flare-ups, and now Yemen bleeds. The regional war that diplomats feared may already be underway in slow motion. The human toll in Yemen. For Yemenis, the geopolitics matter less than survival. Nearly 8 years of war before this escalation had already left the country shattered. The UN estimates more than 400,000 people have died since 2015, the majority from hunger and preventable disease. Infrastructure is in ruins. Blockades have crippled imports of food and medicine. Children suffer the world's highest rates of malnutrition. The funeral for al-Rahawi and his colleagues highlighted another tragedy. Yemenis must mourn leaders killed by foreign missiles while still burying children lost to famine. One mourner told a local journalist, "We bury martyrs every day, whether from bombs or from hunger. The difference is today, the martyrs are leaders." International reactions. Iran condemned the strike, calling it proof of Israel's criminal expansion. Hezbollah issued statements praising the Houthis' steadfastness. The Yemeni government in exile, based in Aden and recognized internationally, was more cautious, accusing both Israel and the Houthis of dragging Yemen deeper into foreign wars. The United Nations voiced concern about escalation. The people of Yemen have already endured years of conflict. Any widening of hostilities threatens catastrophic consequences, a UN spokesperson said. In Washington, officials neither confirmed nor denied Israeli responsibility, but reiterated support for Israel's right to defend itself and for freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. Critics warn that such support risks entangling the United States in yet another Middle Eastern war. Echoes of history. The strike recalls earlier moments when foreign powers turned Yemen into a proxy battlefield. In the 1960s, Egypt and Saudi Arabia fought a proxy war there during Yemen's civil war. In the 2000s, the United States launched drone strikes against al-Qaeda in Yemen, killing both militants and civilians. Today, Israel's involvement adds a new layer, knitting Yemen directly into the Gaza conflict. For ordinary Yemenis, history feels like repetition. Foreign jets in the sky, coffins in the streets, children without food. The slogans change: anti-communism, counter-terrorism, resistance, but the pattern remains. Yemen becomes a theater for other powers' battles, and its people pay the price. The symbolism of mourning. In the Middle East, mass funerals often serve as barometers of legitimacy. The size of Monday's gathering sends a message that, despite war weariness, the Houthis can still mobilize. Images of the mosque, packed to overflowing, of thousands spilling into streets, will be used by Houthi media to project strength and legitimacy. But they also reveal fragility. For many Yemenis, attendance at such funerals is less about loyalty than survival. Public mourning demonstrates alignment with those who control the city. Absence might be read as dissent. Still, the raw grief was palpable. Many in the crowd wept openly. Some carried not only portraits of leaders, but photographs of relatives killed in airstrikes or lost to famine. Gaza and Yemen intertwined. The linkage between Gaza and Yemen is now explicit. Houthi leaders have repeatedly said they will continue attacks on shipping until Israel halts its assault on Gaza. By killing top Houthi leaders, Israel may hope to weaken that campaign, but it may also galvanize further retaliation, tying Gaza and Yemen more tightly together. For Palestinians, the solidarity of Yemenis is both moving and tragic. People suffering their own humanitarian catastrophe still identify with Gaza's plight. For Yemenis, Gaza offers a mirror. Bombed homes, starving children, funerals that blur into daily life. The risk of wider war. The risk now is escalation spiraling beyond control. Hezbollah in Lebanon continues to trade fire with Israel across the border. Militias in Iraq and Syria strike U.S. bases. The Houthis attack shipping in the Red Sea. Iran, while careful to avoid direct war, encourages each of these groups. Israel, embattled in Gaza, now strikes in Lebanon, Syria, and reportedly Yemen. The United States, Britain, and allies respond with their own strikes. Each action justifies the next. Each funeral feeds anger. Each coffin becomes a rallying cry. The funeral in Sana'a is not just a Yemeni event, but part of a regional tableau of grief and fury. Conclusion: the expanding shadow. The funeral of Ahmed Ghalib al-Rahawi and 11 other leaders in Sana'a was a spectacle of mourning and defiance. It underscored the Houthis' resilience, Yemen's vulnerability, and the region's volatility. Thousands gathered not only to honor the dead, but to send a message. Yemen is now fully entangled in the wider confrontation that began in Gaza, but now spans seas and borders. As coffins were carried into the mosque, chants echoed, "Death to America, death to Israel." Whether those chants represent genuine consensus or enforced conformity, they reveal the mood of a capital under siege and a region on edge. The question now is not whether Gaza's war will spill over. It already has. The question is how far the spillover will go, and how many more funerals and how many more cities will mark its path. A midnight ruling. How a federal judge halted the deportation of hundreds of Guatemalan children. The call came in the dead of night. At 2:35 in the morning on Labor Day weekend, U.S. District Judge Sparkle Suknanan was woken with an emergency request. On airport tarmacs in Texas, more than 600 Guatemalan children, unaccompanied minors, sat aboard planes waiting to be deported. The Trump administration had planned to remove them en masse before dawn, but immigrant rights advocates scrambled to stop the flights. Within hours, the judge issued a temporary restraining order, declaring the deportations unlawful and allowing the children to remain in the United States for at least 14 days while their cases are reviewed. The ruling was narrow in time, but sweeping in symbolism. It was a reminder that even amid heated political battles over immigration, the fate of children still depends on the vigilance of courts, the advocacy of lawyers, and the willingness of individuals to resist bureaucratic machinery. The children on the tarmac. The scene in Texas was stark. Dozens of buses pulled up to waiting planes, their passengers unaccompanied minors, most of them from Guatemala. Many had crossed the U.S.-Mexico border in recent months, fleeing violence, poverty, and climate disasters. Some had endured treks of hundreds of miles on foot. Others were smuggled across in the backs of trucks. They were intercepted by Border Patrol, placed in detention, and now face deportation without a chance to plead their cases in full. For immigration authorities, the operation was efficient. Flights had been arranged to Guatemala City. Children were processed quickly, often without lawyers. The timing over a holiday weekend was deliberate, critics say, intended to minimize scrutiny, but advocates noticed. The National Immigration Law Center, NILC, filed an emergency motion late Sunday night, warning that the children face abuse, neglect, persecution, or torture if returned. Judge Suknanan's intervention. Judge Sparkle Suknanan, a relatively new appointee to the federal bench, was roused from sleep to consider the emergency request. By dawn, she had halted the flights. Her order barred the government from deporting the children for 14 days, giving lawyers time to prepare arguments and courts time to review. It was an extraordinary intervention, not only for its urgency, but for its moral stakes. In her order, Suknanen emphasized that deporting unaccompanied minors without due process violated both U.S. law and international obligations. Children, she wrote, cannot simply be treated as cargo to be loaded on planes. They are vulnerable individuals entitled to protection. The legal arguments. The NILC argued that the Trump administration's plan violated the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, which requires special procedures for unaccompanied minors. These include screening for signs of trafficking or persecution, placing them in appropriate shelters, and giving them the opportunity to apply for asylum. Rapid deportation flights, conducted en masse, ignored those requirements. Lawyers also invoked international treaties, including the Convention Against Torture, which obliges states not to return individuals to places where they risk severe harm. Reports from Guatemala of child abuse, gang violence, and systemic neglect made clear that many of the children face such risks. The administration countered that expedited removal was necessary to deter irregular migration and to maintain control of the border. Officials argued that shelters were overcrowded and resources strained. But the judge was unconvinced. Rights, she noted, cannot be suspended for convenience. The children's journeys. Behind the numbers, more than 600 children are individual stories. Some fled villages where gangs recruit boys as young as 12. Others left after hurricanes destroyed homes and crops, leaving families destitute. Many were sent north by parents desperate to give them a chance at survival, even if it meant risking dangerous journeys. Advocates who interviewed children in detention reported harrowing accounts. One 13-year-old girl described being threatened with rape by smugglers before escaping. A 10-year-old boy said his father had been murdered by gangs, and he feared he would be next. A 15-year-old carried only a scrap of paper with his grandmother's phone number. To load such children onto planes without hearings, advocates argued, was to condemn them to possible death. The broader political context. The case highlights the ongoing clash between the Trump administration's immigration agenda and legal safeguards for children. For years, Trump officials have sought to restrict asylum, accelerate deportations, and deter migration through harsh measures. Family separations at the border, Remain in Mexico policies, and the use of pandemic-era Title 40, two expulsions, all reflect this strategy. But children occupy a special place in law and conscience. Courts have repeatedly intervened to block measures that strip unaccompanied minors of protections. Each ruling underscores a tension. While governments have broad power over immigration, they cannot ignore statutes and treaties that recognize the unique vulnerability of children. Guatemala's reality. Sending children back to Guatemala is not merely a logistical matter. It is a moral one. Guatemala is one of the most violent countries in Latin America, with gangs wielding enormous influence. Child labor is widespread. Poverty affects more than half the population. Malnutrition is endemic. The UN has documented high levels of violence against children, including sexual abuse, trafficking, and forced gang recruitment. For indigenous children, discrimination compounds these dangers. Deporting unaccompanied minors into this environment without family or protection is akin to abandonment. Guatemalan officials, while accepting deportation flights under pressure, have often protested privately that their systems cannot absorb so many vulnerable returnees. Shelters are inadequate. Social services are overstretched. Children often disappear after deportation, re-trafficked, or forced into labor. The role of advocates. The National Immigration Law Center has long been at the forefront of immigrant rights litigation. In this case, their rapid mobilization was decisive. Lawyers worked through the night to file the emergency motion. Advocates coordinated with shelters and churches to prepare for the possibility that the children would be released instead of deported. Community groups offered support, food, and translation services. The speed of the legal intervention demonstrates how fragile rights can be. Without the NILC's motion, the children would likely have been flown out before dawn, beyond the reach of U.S. courts. The law existed, but it required action to enforce. The humanitarian response. In the days following the judge's order, shelters in Texas scrambled to accommodate the children. Volunteers brought clothing, blankets, and toys. Local churches organized vigils. Immigration lawyers began intake interviews, trying to match names to relatives, to trace family members who might sponsor the children. For many, the 14-day reprieve is precious time. Time to gather evidence of persecution, time to contact family, time to apply for asylum. Yet uncertainty hangs over every conversation. 14 days is not forever. Political backlash. The ruling sparked predictable political backlash. Trump allies denounced the decision as judicial overreach, accusing the courts of undermining border security. Conservative commentators argued that halting deportations would encourage more families to send children north. Immigrant advocates countered that protecting children is not optional. We are talking about kids who have already endured trauma, who face persecution if returned, one NILC lawyer said. This is about law and humanity, not politics. The Biden administration, which has tried to balance humanitarian commitments with deterrence, offered no immediate comment, wary of reigniting partisan fights over immigration. The children's future for the more than 600 children, the next steps remain uncertain. Some may be reunited with relatives already in the United States. Others may apply for asylum, arguing that they cannot safely return to Guatemala. Some may ultimately be deported once legal challenges play out, but for now, they are here. They are in shelters, drawing pictures, learning English words, calling relatives on donated phones. They are children again, not deportees in waiting. The broader lessons. The case illustrates several broader truths about immigration in America. First, rights exist only if enforced. Laws protecting children mean little if administrations ignore them. Courts and advocates are essential to ensure compliance. Second, immigration policy is not only about numbers, but about people. To speak of over 600 minors risks abstraction. To see them as 10-year-olds with scraps of paper, 13-year-olds fleeing gangs, 15-year-olds clutching dreams, is to grasp the stakes. Third, midnight rulings remind us that democracy depends on vigilance. Bureaucracies move in silence. Planes are loaded at night. Rights can be stripped while the public sleeps. It takes lawyers, judges, and communities willing to act at inconvenient hours to keep the system accountable. Conclusion: a temporary stay, a permanent lesson. Judge Sparkle Suknanan's restraining order lasts 14 days. After that, hearings will determine whether the children can remain longer. Their futures are precarious. But the lesson of this case is already clear. Vigilance matters, law matters, and humanity matters. The children who sat on planes in Texas over Labor Day weekend are not footnotes in policy. They are reminders that behind every immigration statistic lies a human life, vulnerable and deserving of protection. As one advocate put it, we cannot deport children into danger simply to send a message. The only message worth sending is that we will uphold the law and defend the vulnerable, even at 2:35 in the morning.